So I think patients can sometimes have associations with weakness, with being a bit not standing up for ourselves or being walked over. Or alternately, it can have associations where we grit our teeth. There's a feeling of stoicism. I hope that word is not too tricky in various different language, but a sense of it's not patience in the sense that we're absolutely fine with what's happening. We're resisting what's happening, but we're trying not to. So in a sense, we're the best we can do is suppressing how we feel so that we don't express it. And there's some virtue in suppression at times, I think. So as I said, this is a really big, it's a big chapter, covers a lot of different ground. So I'm going to just draw out several different things. And the first thing is to do with the patience or forbearance is particularly, it's particularly there as an antidote to anger and hatred in the mind. And the first 8 verses just describe the characteristics of hatred, and they describe some of the consequences of allowing anger or hatred to go unchecked in the mind. So it says, hatred destroys good deeds or merit. The mind of hatred finds no peace. We have no good sleep. We feel insecure, and hatred disfigures. I think that's really interesting. It disfigures. It's sort of not only physically, when you see somebody under the influence, when they're experiencing hatred or rage, you can see it in their face and you can see it in their body language. But think of that, the mental disfigurement that's going on, if you like. Think of what the quality of that mind that's expressing rage or expressing hatred or strong anger is like. And then Shantideva, the author of the Bodhicharyavatara, goes on to say, friends shrink from the angry person. They are not honored. I wonder if this means that we lose respect for someone who blows off steam in that way, or regularly loses their temper. And we shrink back. We can't quite sort of trust that we won't be on the receiving end of that annoyance or irritation. So there's a certain sort of protectedness that we feel we need to do. And then he finishes, in short, there is no sense in which someone prone to anger is well off. There is no sense in which someone prone to anger is well off. Anger does not benefit us, is what he's saying. It has all these disadvantages. I don't think we necessarily always believe that. I think sometimes we think, if I've got to stand up for myself, or I've got to assert myself. And I think maybe there can be a sense that that's not possible. It's not possible to really assert myself without expressing some anger or some displeasure or irritation. So I just want to give you a little story, which is if you like, how far, apart from being cut up with a saw, how far this sense of non-hatred, non-anger can go. And it's a little story some of you may be familiar with. It's a story of, it's a story that a monk, a Tibetan monk, coming out of having been in a Chinese camp, prison camp in Tibet. And eventually he's freed and he leaves Tibet, he goes to Dharamsala and he meets the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, he asks him a question. He something like, how are you, and how did you get on? And I think implicit in the question is he wants to know about the monk's practice. So the monk says, in answer to his question, he says, I think during this period of about 30 years, I think there was only once or twice when I was in danger of losing my compassion for the Chinese. This is a monk who's been tortured during that time. He's been treated really, really badly. But his main concern was that he didn't allow anger to flower in the mind. The biggest danger for him was that lack of compassion, hatred, during these very, very unfavorable conditions. So that's quite something, isn't it? Only once or twice during all those years when I was in danger of losing my compassion for the Chinese, in danger of letting anger loose. Yeah, so anger has many forms. I think it has many, many different forms. And I've been talking mainly about the stronger ones, the rage and the hatred. But there's also irritation or grumpiness, frustration, or resentment. So those are ones that perhaps we're more familiar with, that they come out at times, or we feel them, but we manage not to express them. So the verse, it goes on to say, we mustn't be dejected or feel the sense of disgrace in us from experiencing these manifestations of anger. Just as we're looking to learn to be more patient and to endure what comes our way from other people when they express anger and hatred towards us, we also need to do that to ourselves, to have that same quality of patience in relationship to our own shortcomings, our own failings, because they're very natural. Anger itself is a natural thing. It's not often pleasant. There's often a sense of dukkha around it. But that's what we're working from. We haven't perfected patience. So anger and its various friends will arise. And maybe they arise quite regularly, depending on our personality. It may be that for some of us, greed or manifestations of craving arise more frequently than anger. Oh, there's also blame and complaint, really manifestations of anger. You can probably get more of a sense of that little line of the verse. In short, there is no sense in which someone prone to anger is well off. None of these are particularly pleasant sounding states. They're all states of dukkha. So I think largely there is that sense of working with having patience with our own mind, but largely it's talking about working in relation to others, to how we respond to others. And this quality of forbearance is asking, do we have the capacity to endure excuse me, when people behave towards us in ways that we don't like, in ways that we find difficult? Can we endure others' anger or blame or criticism of us without reacting back. So it's practice at the coalface, if you like. Practice in the face of rudeness, unpleasantness, dismissiveness, being ignored, not getting what we want, being held on at the call center for an extra 10 minutes or something. How do we respond in those situations? Are we able to keep a sense of equilibrium, mental and emotional equilibrium? Or do we find ourselves getting wound up and for those all those different manifestations of aversion start appearing? So I think it's about a conditional, about not having conditional relationships. So how conditional is our perhaps our friendliness or our willing to help someone in the face of an unfriendly response or an irritated response. And I was thinking of two things actually. One is a friend of ours in the Sangha, a friend of mine, who works with homeless people and you know, who are out on the streets in very difficult circumstances, and that difficulty often gets expressed towards her. So there's quite a lot of there's quite a lot of stuff comes her way, and I'm really impressed every time I hear her talk about working with people, how she manages to not react back, but just keep that sense of equanimity, keep that sense of compassion for the struggle that people are going through. And then I also remember my own experience of working in a what's called a pupil referral unit. So this is a unit for kids, often teenagers, who've been excluded from school for a number of reasons, but usually connected with poor behavior. And so I worked as a supply there for about 6 months in this place, and I found it really difficult to be sworn at most days. I was sort of mistrusted and had all sorts of motives sort of imputed, and to maintain friendliness was really, I found it really hard, actually, really struggled, really challenging. Yeah, so sometimes what we'll do in those circumstances, we might lose the friendliness, and perhaps we just push back a bit with a similar sort of energy. The energy that comes our way, you think, you know what, I'm just gonna push back a bit. And again, a little story. I was on holiday a few years ago. It was my dad's 80th, so all my family, or most of my family, we're a big family, got together and were away for a few days together. And my dad, he's probably, for quite a lot of the early part of my life, was someone I was quite scared of, because he's got quite a temper. It comes out very easily, and yeah, he's sort of on the aggressive side of things. And what I noticed was it would still come out in him. I mean, he's well over 18 now, but it will still come out. And it's almost like I was still reacting to it from, I don't know, a much sort of younger perspective or something, but I would find myself coming back, pushing back in not as an aggressive, not overly aggressive, but there was some aggression in how I pushed back. And so one time we did this, he'd got quite cross at me because I'd sent him up a very, very steep hill, trying to get somewhere, and the car came down, and yeah, he got really quite angry with me, and I pushed back. It was one of those moments. And he was just quiet. He didn't say anything. And I felt really bad. I like that just was not necessary. And basically he's a bit scared. He's in this position. He's in this car. He can't go forwards because there's a car coming down the hill. He can't go backwards very easily because he can no longer turn very easily in this very narrow street because of his age, because of various physical conditions. So he did the habitual thing that he knows how to do, which is get angry about it. It really showed me the unnecessariness of it. And particularly when he was just quite quiet. It's like, well, it was habit for him, but I didn't need to come back at him. Yeah, so there's a variety of ways in which our anger can get the better of us. I just realized I've got far too much to say, as always. So I want to talk about a couple of different perspectives that we've got in this chapter. So the overall context is around patience as an antidote to anger and hatred. But there are a number of wisdom perspectives in the chapter that I think can be very helpful. It can sort of undercut, if you like, the views in the mind that allow anger to arise in the first place. So one of the perspectives is Shantideva simply says, seeing the enemy as valuable. So the person that makes us angry is what he's calling the enemy. So seeing that person as having value to us, having value to our practice. And what he's saying in a nutshell is that they're giving us the opportunity through their behavior, doing something that we don't want or being angry with us. They give us the opportunity to practice patience, to practice forbearance. If we only ever practiced with nice people, we wouldn't have the opportunity to be challenged in that way, to say, well, how am I when things don't go my way? It's quite easy in a way to practice when, you know, we're surrounded by people who are usually pleasant to us and happy to go along with what we want. But they don't necessarily illuminate the areas where we need to practice. Yeah, there are these, some of you may have heard of the technical term, the anusayas. So these are underlying tendencies, anusaya, and underlying tendencies of greed, aversion, and ignorance in slightly different forms. So if you like, those underlying, it's a bit like weeding in a way. You need to sort of to turn over the ground a bit, and being with different people, being with people who perhaps do rub us up the wrong way a bit. It's very interesting to see, well, how do I respond to this? How much am I able to keep friendliness? It doesn't mean not setting boundaries. It doesn't mean you know, being appropriate with boundaries, but remaining with some degree of friendliness, with some degree of openness. So Shantideva says, forbearance is produced in dependence upon his malign intention. So really it is him who is the cause of my forbearance. I'll read that one again. Forbearance is produced in dependence on his malign intention. So it is really him who is the cause of my forbearance. So not only is your enemy giving you the opportunity to practice patience and practice forbearance, actually you have to give them the credit for it as well. It's not that they're just providing the opportunity, but yeah, it's all down to them. They're the cause. They're the cause of you, your patience developing and your forbearance developing. There's another story within the tradition, which many of you will be very familiar with, and that's the story of Angulimala, the finger necklace. So I just want to skip to the end of the story, so I'm just going to really skim over the first bit, which is Angulimala is a bandit, a murderer, and he collects fingers. That's where his name comes from each of his victims. So he's killed a lot of people. He attempts to kill the Buddha, and he's not able to. They have a meeting that completely turns Angulimala around, and he becomes a monk. So there's one occasion where he's walking with the Buddha, and he's walking in a village. Maybe they're collecting alms round or something, and people start throwing stones at him. They recognize Angulimala, and he's with the Buddha, so you know they're not going to do anything too bad, but they know who he used to be, and they respond in that way. So they're throwing stones, and the Buddha just says to Angulimala, he says, "Bear it, monk. Bear it, monk." He's saying this is the karmic fruits of your previous behavior. This is the karma vipaka. So you have to bear it, and then yeah, that's how you'll get through it. So I was thinking about this in relation to our own tendencies. So this is back to us rather than others. Back to how do we learn to be with our own anger or irritation when it arises? How do we learn to bear it, if you like, rather than express it or suppress it? Well, initially, I think we just have to recognize that's what's happening. Often, I think we recognize it when we're in the middle of it. I'm really frustrated, or you know, in the middle of saying something that would be best unsaid. But I think it can really help to maybe just distinguish between that what we usually do is we usually focus on the cause of or the supposed cause of the anger or the irritation, and we don't pay so much attention to what's actually happening in our direct experience, what's happening in the body, how does the body and the mind feel when anger's there, and just in a way taking that step back from the end of the story, from the supposed cause, and seeing the cause being all this reactivity that's going on in here. It's all going on in here. Let go of the story, come back to the feeling, and as much as we can practice resting with those feelings, with interest, with curiosity about what's happening. So learning to stay with feelings rather than, as I say, acting them out or suppressing them, pretending that they're not there. It's quite a fine balancing act, I think. I think it takes, depending on one's temperament, can take a lot of years to really just not buy into the story, not buy into what they said or what they did, but actually stay with our own body-mind process. So that's one view, seeing the enemy as valuable, or seeing the value of the enemy. A second perspective, I came across this. It's a teacher called Alexander Berzin. I think that's his name. And I think he's from the Tibetan tradition. And he says, don't be surprised when people let us down or hurt us and disappoint us, when things don't go our way. This is exactly why we want to get out of samsara. So samsara being conditioned existence, being the world where we're functioning within a framework of greed, hatred, and delusion, rather than love, generosity, and wisdom. So while we function within that framework of conditioned existence, there is going to be suffering, there is going to be dukkha. And that's what he's pointing to. He's saying, what can we really expect from samsara? What he's pointing to those expectations that actually are the cause of more suffering, and encouraging us to have a more realistic relationship to the inherent unreliability, the inherent sort of imperfections of this conditioned world that we live in. And encouraging us to have a perspective that is okay. We'll be let down regularly by other people, by things, by the weather, by all sorts of things won't go as we want it. But it's like trying to train us in modifying our expectations, because generally our unseen expectations are high. Because our expectations often go in line with our desire for how we want things to be. They're in line with our craving. So what can we expect from samsara? Yeah, and looking to become a little bit more realistic. I think one of the ways, again, in practice, just bringing it perhaps to our sitting practice, our meditation practice, is working with quite small discomfort, working with things perhaps not quite being the way we want them to be. Maybe we're sitting in meditation, we've realized that actually we're a bit hot. So rather than, just taking a layer off, trying to undo that zip in a way that other people can't hear it too much. Perhaps sitting with it, sitting with what's it like to be a bit too warm or a bit cool, and not sort of trying to reach for a blanket. When I've spent quite a bit of time in Burma, as some of you know, and there you get bitten by mosquitoes quite a lot. And it's a real practice I could really see some days when I felt that the mind was quite equanimous. I didn't have that much of a reaction. Other days, scratching, really trying to avoid being bitten. And I was reminded of this because I was out on a cycle ride at the weekend and got bitten by an ant. And actually, I've got this mark. Honestly, I've got this mark on my arm, bright red. And I've been very, very aware of this minor irritation all week. And there are times when I scratch it, and it's causing this reaction. This mental reaction is higher. And there are other times when, okay, it itches a bit, and the mind is just calmer with it. It's not reacting. So I think we can practice with small discomforts and see, do we have to always make them right? Do we always have to be trying to reduce and minimize? Are we yeah, we can notice how much of the time we're looking to adjust experience to maintain our comfort. You know, can we be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, quite consciously, and be okay with that? There's nothing wrong with being comfortable. But if we're always adjusting, then it just reinforces this habit that something that if something's a bit wrong, we have to try and make it right. And we can't always, we can't. So we could just try and be with things as they are a little bit more. Relaxing around discomfort and relaxing that control of our environment and that control of others. Any sense of relaxing control allows us to, it can affect in all sorts of different areas. Yes, one big area here is yeah, either when we're not well, or we've had an injury, or when we get older, and the deterioration of the body. Another little phrase from Shantideva, he says, "Nothing remains difficult if practiced with." Nothing remains difficult if practiced with. I think he's perhaps pointing to that tendency to interfere with or to fiddle, to try and make things okay. And sometimes we can expend more energy trying to make something right than just sort of accepting it as it is. It's not quite perfect, but things are okay. So I had one more, but I'm going to leave that because I just want to finish with just a few words about the value and the virtue of developed patience. So I said quite near the beginning how yeah, hatred disfigures, friends shrink, the person is not honored. So that list. So a bit later, quite late in the chapter, Shantideva uses other words. He talks about the mind of someone who has cultivated patience and forbearance as being serene. There's a serenity in the mind. There's joy. There's happiness. And then he talks about things like the freedom from disease, long life, and prosperity. And I don't know, the tradition often says things like that. I think it's similar. There's a similar list for metta, the effect of metta on the mind. And it's easy to not give it too much attention. But actually, in the light of what we know these days about the effects of mental states on the nervous system and on our health in general, I think actually, well, there is something in there. There is it. But certainly from an emotional point of view, a mind with patience, that's patient. And I was thinking today, and I encourage maybe you to think about it now, just perhaps remember or think of a time when you have felt patient. Maybe it's when you're around children, young children, not teenagers who've been excluded from bad behavior, maybe, but maybe, I don't know, maybe grandchildren or nieces or nephews, and children or pets. When you feel like, well, they might not be doing exactly what you want, but there's a sense of patience, and how that patience is quite close to love. Bhante actually says patience is a form of love, which I really, and I can really see that, can really get that. That sense of when you're really allowing someone, a child or a pet, to be as they are, to be doing what they are happy doing. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there. I'll maybe just a couple of points to take into the groups. firstly, I suppose where you, perhaps there's areas where you particularly feel impatience, or you feel irritation arise, and maybe not so much about the end result, the objects, but what that experience is like. Just actually just getting in touch with what that experience of impatience is like. Can you describe it? And then maybe the other side of it, what does the experience of patience or forbearance, when does that arise, and what does that feel like? Do you have a sense of the value of patience? Okay, so we'll be in groups for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back again to meditate.
Can I just ask my Danish friends, our Danish friends, whether they'd rather be in a group together? I don't know how much time you get to spend together, or whether you'd rather be distributed with everyone else.
I would prefer that we get distributed, so they get to meet everyone.
Okay.
But we haven't talked about that. What do you guys feel?
I think it's fine to meet everyone.
Yeah.
Also.
Good.
In that case, I'm going to completely randomize it.
Yep.
Because there's too many. Sorry, Natasha. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's okay for me to be distributed.
Okay. I'll stop recording the talk as well.